have a bunch of people signed up for the sessions, so we're just going to wait for a little bit while everybody comes in. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Molly. I'm the ETD advisor for College of Graduate Studies, which is a fancy way of saying I check the formatting of your paper and kind of help you navigate the final approval process for your thesis or dissertation. So thank you to Amanda and Michael for getting this together and putting it on. This is a great place to start if you're getting started on the process, whether this semester or for future. Everything I talk about today is going to be covered in much more detail and probably more articulately in our ETD handbook. We have this handbook that functions both as a handbook and a template in Word, and I'll show you where to find that as we chat today. So I guess I'll bring up my very complex PowerPoint here.
Do you have access to share? Do you?
Nope, let me just go for it.
There you go. Okay.
Alrighty. Cool. Can you guys see this? Again, very exciting PowerPoint. Cool. Alrighty. So this is basically my spiel. I'm going to talk to you about the format of the requirements for the formatting, which are fairly straightforward, but they just, crop up in a bunch of little ways. I'll talk through the components that make up your paper, both the required components as well as some of the things that aren't necessarily required, but come up in almost every single paper. So we'll, talk through those. I'll show you our thesis and dissertation resources page. It's kind of your holy grail moving forward. And when we look through that resources page, I'll show you both our deadlines page, which is super important to know. And then we'll go through the ETD handbook real quickly just to give you a visual reference for some of the things that I'll talk about. As well as at the end, I'll do a little bit about ETD itself and some of the things that people, end up getting hung up on when they're working. But to start, I just want to say, for those of you who don't know, the order of the process, basically, you were working on your thesis or dissertation. At some point, you will defend your paper. So you will write the paper, obviously, defend the paper, and then after your defense is when the final approvals happen. I check your paper for formatting. I don't have anything to do with the checking of the content. So first, your paper, after you finish defense and you've done all the formatting fixes, everything, I'll approve it from a formatting standpoint. After that point, it gets sent to your committee for their final approval. We used to do this approval process in person with physical printed out copies of your thesis or dissertation, with physical signatures. We're trying to come into the 21st century, so we started using ETD, the ProQuest platform, in 2021. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, or we'll have some time to chat about them at the end. So yeah, let's get going. All right. Ooh. Right in the middle of the page. Okay. So, just to start off, I want to let you know when I'm talking about pages and margins, page numbers, stuff like that, I'm primarily talking about portrait pages. So, this standard page that you typically see. We will talk about landscape pages, those pesky landscape pages, in a little bit. So just for your reference, when I tell you that the margin should be 1.25 inches to the left and 1 inch on the top, bottom, and right, that means for, long ways. So the reason you want there to be that 1.25 inches to the left on the page is to allow for binding of the pages. So if the pages were printed out and bound on the side, you don't want any of the content getting cut off. So that one's a fairly straightforward one. Your page numbers, again, for portrait pages, should be in the upper right corner. They should be 0.75 inches from the top and 1 inch from the right, again, excluding landscape pages. This is gonna put those page numbers right, like just right above the start of the content on the page. They look real nice there. Any higher up, it looks a little funky. Any lower down, and the page numbers start to encroach on your content. So you should be able to tell visually if they're off. Also, just a little sneaky hint for you, that 1 inch, so your page numbers, I use page numbers quite often to just do a quick visual check for any margin violations. So I, quite often the content goes over the margin on the right side rather than the left, because English is read left to right. So that's just kind of a natural happenstance. And so I really recommend using that page number as a visual reference when you're checking for margin stuff. Alrighty, font size should be 10 to 12 points. Anything smaller, it's difficult to read. Anything larger, and it looks weird. Like it looks like you're trying to hit a page count for your dissertation. So don't do that. Spacing, again, you want to do 1.5 to 2 spaced. Anything closer together, again, it's difficult to read. Anything further apart, and it looks kind of goofy. So. And then style. By style, I mean the overall visual appearance, your decisions on what the paper looks like, whether that be the font that you decide to use, whether you decide to indent the first paragraph or not indent the first paragraph or not indent any paragraphs. That goes for, the actual distance of spacing, the size of font. All of these things have to be consistent throughout the paper. This can be more of an issue more often for those of you working on your dissertation, because oftentimes you're combining other works into one cohesive dissertation. So making sure that, for instance, if one paper you had the titles left aligned, and in the other paper, the titles were centered, you got to pick one. We don't care. We have absolutely no preference what style decisions you make. You just have to be consistent throughout the paper, or I'll have to bounce it back to you. This is one of the trickier ones to notice, particularly if you're just going cross-eyed working on this thing and you want to be done. So checking for all of this is really my goal and my role here. So, don't put too much pressure on yourself to make sure you nitpick and check every single thing. But again, these are the primary things you're going to be checking for to make sure that the formatting is correct. And these are all rules that make your paper look much more polished and professional. They can be a little tedious, but I promise they do make a big difference. And then it's visually just very representative of a very professional work. So, okie dokie, moving on. So the components of the paper, the bolded items in the list are the ones that are required. Pretty much everything else does appear in most papers, but they're not technically required. So you're going to have, these major chunks, but basically it's going to be separated into your preliminary pages and then the content after that. We'll go through it in the ETD handbook, but your preliminary page numbers are going to be different than your main body page numbers. So we will take a look at those when we get going. Okay. So preliminary pages in order. Obviously, you're going to start with the title page. That is a very specific structure. So make sure that you take a look at that in the handbook. Then that's going to be followed by an abstract. This is to cover the entire work. So particularly those of you doing your dissertation, that will need to cover the entirety of the research that you talk about. So those are absolutely required. Your acknowledgements and dedication pages are not required, but it is very odd not to have them because this is the place where you are able to thank the people in your life who have maybe helped you get to this point. So the acknowledgements page is where you thank any professional or academic contacts or mentors that you have that you want to give thanks to, give a shout out to, whatever. Any other people, any personal contacts you have, friends, family, dogs, pets. I've seen plenty of dog shout outs in the dedication pages. That all that content needs to be on the dedication page rather than the acknowledgements page. So acknowledgements is for professional contacts, dedication page is for personal. We had a great question, TOC. What is that? That's table of contents. I couldn't fit it on the page otherwise, so I abbreviated it. But your table of contents is to follow the dedication page, should you have one. It is, again, required. You can have as little or as much information. Oh, that's a great question, Derek. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. So the table of contents, you can have as much or as little information as you want. You can have just the chapter headings. You can have the chapter headings and the subheadings and every little thing. It's up to you, but you do need to manage your list properly. And that means making sure everything is aligned the same way, making sure all your numbers are lined up appropriately, etc. I'm going to take just the brief sidebar to answer Derek's question. Derek asked, the font size restrictions include subscripts, footnotes, and other odd text. Great question. No, those can be smaller. I can't imagine why you'd want them to be larger. But again, you just need to stay consistent. So if you decide to go with a size 8 font for all of your figure captions, make sure they're all in size 8 font. Okay, after your table of contents, you'll have your lists of X, Y, and Z. So most often that is a list of tables and a list of figures. I've also seen lists of equations, lists of nomenclature, whatever the case may be. So anything that you want to have listed out and to be able to reference is going to need to be in that lists section that follows the table of contents. And then finally, the introduction. You do not have to have an introduction. So if you don't want to have one, that's a-okay. However, if you do have one, it does need to be included within the preliminary pages. That, or you need to turn it into chapter 1 because when you start the main pages, that has to start with chapter 1. You can't have anything else. So when I say main pages, this is where you'll have the page numbers transition from lowercase Roman numerals in the preliminary pages to regular Arabic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. Again, we'll go through this when I show you the handbook. So yeah, the main pages, your chapters, your content, go for it. And then after chapters, you will have sections at the end. Now, you have a couple of different options for your references. Your references are, of course, required. You have a couple of different options as to how you want to do them. I've seen it both ways, so feel free. You can either have your references all combined at the end of the paper, or you can have them listed per chapter. So what that looks like is after the final section of your chapter, you would move on then to references per that chapter and only that chapter. If you decide to do that, this is a nice little reprieve we give you. So if you decide to do your references separated by chapter rather than all at the end, if your references are in different styles, you don't have to convert them to all match. So that is one reprieve that you have from the consistency rule. If you have your references separated out by chapter, they do not all have to follow the same style guide. However, if you decide to put them all together in one section, you can't switch around styles. They all have to follow the same style guide. So then after references, which again are pretty self-explanatory, you'll have your appendices. Oh, sorry, I went too far. You don't have to have appendices, but again, it's extremely rare that I don't see them. Appendices is obviously the section that you can put supplementary material, you know, stuff you don't want to have right in the middle of the paper. That can also be at the end. This is another thing that you know, I've seen some people put supplementary information at the end of every chapter rather than at the end of the paper. I don't necessarily recommend that just because it can make the paper look clunky. But again, it's up to you. We don't technically require that you don't put supplementary info in there. David asked, is there a requirement? Oh, and Amanda is just all over it, but basically no, there's no requirement as to the style of the paper. It's up to you and your, you know, what discipline you follow. So okie dokie. So moving on. Oh, now it won't let me go. Sorry, guys. Okay. So I'm going to show you our thesis and dissertation resources page. This is if you take one thing or one piece of information from this whole thing, I hope it's this web page, because everything that I'm talking about, you know, while it's probably a little bit easier to get this distilled from me, you can find all these answers on the web page. So you if you remember anything, please remember this. Okay, can you guys see this page? Sorry, I'm very bad at screen sharing, so thanks, Elise. Alrighty, so this is the thesis and dissertation resources page. You can find this by going to the University of Idaho and searching thesis or dissertation or thesis resources. So if you don't know exactly where this page is from what I'm showing you, don't worry, just Google it. It's like the very first thing that pops up. So this page is a list of all the important links, as well as a nice little one-stop shop over here on the right for all of the documents and the handbook PDF and Word document that you can use as a template. This is a good time as any to draw your attention to this part right here for those of you who are working in latex. I am sorry, we do not have a template created for you guys. In my experience, disciplines that do use latex have a template floating around that they all utilize, and that typically works great. But just so you know, it's a little over my head, so I can help you find out how to fix. I mean, I can help you notice what to fix. I'm not great at troubleshooting in latex, and by not great, I mean I can't. So sorry for that. We're working on trying to get a little bit more of a resource for you, maybe pay to have a template created. But at this point, we don't have anybody with those skills to support. So, but I've never had anybody not finish because they're using latex. They've always been able to figure it out, and I have full faith in anybody who will be using it, that you will be able to do that. Sorry, I did make that confusing. Apologies. So we had a question about the appendices. Do they go with the chapters or at the end? They go at the end. You can put them per chapter, but I don't recommend it. So just don't even worry about it. Put them at the end because that's where they should go. So alrighty. So I want to draw your attention to this link here. Again, this is super important, so if you weren't paying attention before, pay attention now. This is the dates and deadlines page. So this is going to take you to this page where you're going to click on the theses and dissertations deadlines. This has gotten an overhaul, so it makes a little more sense now. We're very excited. And this has step-by-step information about what the order of steps is for you to complete this last piece of your paper. So we could chat through that in a little bit more detail later, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that these deadlines are all listed out here for each and every semester for each and every step that is described above. So for instance, if any of you are working to finish this semester, you are required to defend by a certain day this semester. You are also required to have the paper approved by me for formatting at a certain point, which provides enough time for your committee to approve. So we can chat through that in a little bit more detail later, but if anybody has any questions, just drop them in the chat. And yes, I definitely also would like to second that, to bookmark these pages because it makes it a lot faster, and you will probably visit them quite a few times over the next few weeks. So and again, there's a lot of information on here, but it will all start to be more clear as you go through the process. And now we're going to move on to one of my favorite parts, which is the handbook. Different journals might have different formats for graphs. Keep the source format and make it consistent. That's a great question from Derek. Again, that is one of those things that I'm not really checking. More of the consistency comes from the stuff that you are typing. Anything that's in tables or figures, I typically try to keep hands off of. That is more a question of what is industry standards, what is best practices for your discipline, and that's a question better answered by your major professor or your committee. So that one is up to you. Okie dokie, I am going to just scroll through the handbook here, but again, you can download this Word document and you can basically just put your information over this. The template is preset with all of the required pages, all of the required setup. So if you're a Word guru, you are more than welcome to start from scratch, but it's kind of a time waster. So I do just recommend starting at least with the handbook. So for your title page, you're going to obviously have your title right up here at the top, nice and nice and prominent. I'm going to answer that question in just a little bit after we get through the title page. So for your title, you want all words of 4 letters or more to be capitalized because you want it to stand out, basically. You don't have to change it for other chapters or, elsewhere, but on the title page, you want it to look a little bit more intentional. So, okay, and then obviously, if you're writing a thesis, put thesis here instead of a dissertation. And then you want this information to be laid out in this order because it's aesthetically pleasing. So your degree, obviously, you put your degree in, and then your major, obviously your major. You are graduating from the College of Graduate Studies, not your respective disciplines college. So make sure you have it be College of Graduate Studies. And then you put your name. Here is where you will put your committee members. You will include what is called here your department administrator. Again, we get these formatting requirements and like the terminology and everything from ProQuest. So department administrator is sometimes confusing. It means your department head. So your department head, your department chair, whoever is kind of the overseer of your program, that's your department administrator. A couple of times I've had people put in the admin, like the office administrator for the department, and that's not right because they don't know what you're writing about. They got other things to do. So, and then this date here is going to refer to the month that your degree would be conferred. So for those of you, for instance, who will be graduating this semester, that would read May 2024, because again, it refers to the month that you will be getting your degree. Okie dokie, I'm gonna take a moment to answer a couple questions. Sarah asks if a couple of tables need 10-point font for the information. Do all tables need to be formatted at 10 point? Again, it's up to you. I don't really give you too much grief about how you decide to display your tables and whatnot. I will say it looks weird if you switch back and forth. So it's probably something you wouldn't end up doing regardless. But technically I won't come after you if the tables aren't exactly identical, because I know that you need to rearrange the sizing. You need to, oftentimes try to make things fit on the page, and so sometimes you need to shrink them down smaller. So should we always list as department administrator? Yes. No, please do not change the terminology. Again, if I could change it, I would, but because it confuses people. But no, it needs to be listed department administrator, because that is what Procrust calls it. So okay, moving on. So I'm not going to talk about much of the content that's written out in the handbook, because it is just what I'm yapping about right now, just more clearly articulated. So feel free to, I guess ignore what I'm saying, because you can go into the handbook and find all of this information. So, so what I was talking about with these page numbers, so hopefully this is clear. This is going to be the style of your preliminary page numbers. So this is, again, lowercase Roman numerals, and they're going to start on the abstract page with II or 2. Technically, the title page is page 1, but it looks real goofy when you have a page number on it. So don't put the page number on there. So again, they'll start right there with 2, and then you can see plenty of information. Oh, don't break the template. Good luck. Like, that really is your number one goal, is just don't break the template. And sometimes, and I hate to say it, but like sometimes if you do break the template, it's almost easier to just copy your information into a new unbroken template than it is to try and fix it. So it's the equivalent of turning it off and turning it back on again. Okay, like I mentioned, the acknowledgements page, obviously, instead of mentioning family, friends, pets, etc. here, use the dedication page. So following the acknowledgements, here's the dedication page. Now, as you may have noticed, this page looks different. It is not consistent. It is the only page that is an exemption to the consistency rule. We want the dedication page text to really stand out. These are your people, and potentially furry friends. This is your personal thank you, and so we really want it to stand out. So the content is supposed to be centered horizontally and vertically on the page, kind of like a book dedication would be. So you can see way further down on the page, centered. You can make this page as long or as short as you want it to. Okay, following that is your table of contents. Again, you're going to start with the abstract. You don't need to have the title page listed on there. You are going to want to make sure that you keep updating your table of contents as you go. Otherwise, it can start to show error messages and get a little bit funky. So you also want to make sure that these beautiful numbers are all lined up to the right, because otherwise the line looks wavy on the page and it doesn't look very nice. So moving on through. So like I said, after the conclusion or after the chapter 4, you move into appendices. So here we go, list of tables. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory, list of figures. You guys have more than likely done this, so you don't need me to tell you what it is, but you do want to make sure, again, that you're updating these tables as you go, because things can get a little bit funky, especially if you are actively editing. So I want to pause here on this page because we haven't discussed it just yet, but it's not applicable to everybody. But if it is applicable to you, it's very important that you include it. So for those of you who are, this is mostly for people working on dissertations, but I've seen this for theses as well. Your statement of contribution page is to describe or give notice to any collaborators or co-authors that you may have. So again, this most specifically refers to those of you who are submitting, multi-authored articles as part of your dissertation or thesis. But, this is a page that if you need it, you will know. So if this doesn't apply to you, you delete this page. If it does apply to you, you will want to work with your major professor to kind of figure out how you want to go, how you want to present this statement. I've seen statements that are incredibly complex and separated by a chapter. I've seen statements that are like, 3 sentences. So again, it's typically discipline specific, what is on this page, and I don't have any expectations of what it is. It's just, if you have collaborators on your paper, you have to make sure that they're cited. Even if you're the primary author or what have you, you still need to make sure that you state their contribution. So okay, and then in addition to that statement of contribution, I want to talk about one more thing that's just a little bit more specific to those of you working with multi-authored articles or articles that you are that are like smaller, that are making up the body of your dissertation. This right here below is an example of how to cite a chapter already submitted or published. Okay. It's like a standard citation, paper citation. It's names listed, name of the article, and then the name of where it's been submitted and accepted. This is a conversation that I have had with many a dissertation writer, so much so that I actually went to the library, to our Evan Williamson over in the library, who is kind of my point of reference for any copyright, basically any information that I need to know about how to properly present these. His recommendation to you. So only chapters already submitted to a journal are allowable for inclusion. If you've just submitted the paper, if you haven't gotten any information about whether or not it's been accepted, we do not want you to list the name of that publication. And here's why. We can't predict whether or not the paper will be accepted. And we don't want you to have potentially false information in your paper. Not that we don't think your paper is great. It more than likely would, but there's potentiality for error there and inaccuracy that we want to avoid. So if you are going to be listing the information for a paper that you've submitted but has not been accepted yet, you just list the names and the name of the article. We do not want you to submit specifically say what publication it was. You can say submitted, in abstraction, or like submitted for potential publication, or something like that, something that's vague enough if you need to include that, but you do not have to specifically say anything about that. If you put in that chapter title and everything, we're going to assume that you have submitted this. Okie dokie. I think that's pretty much all the like nitty-gritty things I wanted to chat about in this. Everything again listed out in here is what I have been yapping about. So please take the time to read the handbook carefully, because it really makes a big difference and can give you a lot of reference points. Is there a limit to graphs or tables per page? Not at all. But my recommendation to you is that you don't try to put too many on one page, because we do not want you to separate titles or captions from the content that it refers to, and sometimes trying to fit too many images can push the captions off the page. So just be conscious of that when you're working on it. Again, please read this carefully. This section here is also important. This is the ETD section. So this should give you some information about the ETD of it all. I will talk through this in more detail a little bit later. Okay, so I want to get to a couple of things of note. If you really just want a nitty-gritty cheat sheet, you know, something to like just have as a reference, print it out and put on, you know, the wall. This is your girl right here. This is the formatting checklist. So this basically puts in, you know, one place all the information about the content, the formatting, all the requirements, all in one place. So there are a couple of things listed here that I did not talk about, specifically your what I was talking about earlier about trying to keep figures, captions, titles, etc. on the same page with the content that it refers to. It's referred to as widows and orphans. Basically, you don't want a title to appear at the very bottom of a page with no content under it, and then the rest follows. You have a limited amount of pages to use, and so you want things to look more aesthetically pleasing rather than trying to cram everything in on one page. So I'm going to take a moment and look at a couple questions. Dave said, same template and rules basically for master's thesis versus doctor's dissertation. Absolutely. The biggest differences will be, especially for those working on dissertations, you will maybe have some more complex content, like, you know, you need to include a statement, a contribution, you need to organize and cite things a little bit differently. But other than that, the formatting requirements are identical. And the Mason said, does the published paper should be put, sorry, I am published paper chapter, with the abstract and everything. I am not quite sure what that question is, so go ahead and send that to me through email and I will try to answer it there. Is it allowed to include the preprint version of papers that are accessible online through websites but are not published yet in any journal? That sounds okay. I think that is definitely a discipline specific question, or maybe a question that if you don't have a clear answer on, let us know and we can talk to Dr. McMurtry about that, the Dean of COGS. He's kind of the like last stand against all of these weird little quirky questions. So okay, where was I? Widows and orphans. Again, this is just a pretty straightforward thing. Oh, and this I also use to enforce the rule of not having sentence fragments at the top of pages or the bottom of pages. By that I mean you don't want to have just like half of a sentence appearing all alone and then like another paragraph starts after that. It looks weird, it looks awkward, it looks dare I say a little sloppy, and so that is one of the things that I am also checking for. And then this is an important one. This references one that I have not mentioned yet. Keep references that are 2 to 3 lines together. References of 4 or more can be split over 2 pages, but you need to do so at the halfway point. What that means is we don't want, again, like these single straggling lines, which is what happens when you split up references of 2 to 3 lines over 2 pages. You get like one single line at the bottom of one page and one single line at the top. It looks, again, a little sloppy, like you just copied it in there and didn't care about what it, you know, looked like. And so that rule is to avoid having that happen. And then this page of the checklist is all of the content, the components, and the order in which they should appear. So if you have more questions about where things should go, this is your reference. Probably a more trustworthy one than what I've been saying. And then this section here is just some extra little tips and tidbits, particularly about making sure that your page breaks and your tables and all that jazz update properly. So, alrighty. For the lists, tables and figures, do full captions get included? You can, you don't have to. I've seen people do it either way. And then Derek, how do you deal with orphans with set text that has already been published and set margins? So you need to take that text and put it into a new document. So set text and set margins that don't match the requirements of the formatting, you need to change those. So you're not just taking the text, even if it's been publicly, you can move the content around to make it match the formatting here. So if you have set formatting from a differently published paper, you have to change that formatting to make it match this formatting. Okie dokie, we've come to the worst page of all, the landscape page. If I had to tell you the thing, because I've been doing this for a couple years now, and the number one thing that slows people down, or like frankly, this is the thing that gets people the closest to not finishing on time, is the landscape page, specifically the page numbers. Now, if you notice, page number is not in the upper right corner. It's in the lower right corner. This is because your landscape page is not going to appear landscape if it's printed out. So we want to make sure that if the pages should be printed out, the margins match and your page numbers are going to align if they're stacked on top of each other. So the margins for the landscape page, instead of being 1.2 inches or 1.25 from the left, it's going to be 1.25 from the top, because these pages would be rotated if they were printed out. These page numbers are so pesky. Oftentimes it can be very difficult for like just you to see whether or not that page number is in the right spot. So my number one recommendation for landscape pages is, if you don't have too many of them, avoid them, because they can really, really slow you down if like it's the one thing that's holding you up. The other option is the way you avoid them is you rotate your content. So instead of having the table, listed out this way, instead you'd have the page rotated, and then you rotate the content rather than rotating the page to fit the content. That's my recommendation. If you don't have that option, I'm very sorry. You're just going to want to make sure that you keep a really close eye on margins and page numbers for these guys. So, alrighty. A published paper can be a chapter. If so, you need to cite it at the top of the chapter. Yes, exactly. Just like we talked about with chapter 1, that citation that is under that. Again, you can see that in the handbook when you check it out. And then this is called literature cited. You can call it references. You can call it bibliography. Again, you can change the terminology of these things. It just has to be a references section. So there you go. All right. Oh, we got a couple more. All righty. So I'm going to get to the final piece, because again, I've been chit-chatting. So again, any questions, please shout them out. The ETD of it all. So this is, I think, one of the other things that people get a little held up on, is they get a little confused about what ETD is, what you should be doing on it, when you should be submitting stuff. So this is going to be my spiel about that. Again, if you have any questions, please shout them out. ETD is the platform, or the terminology for the ProCrest platform that we publish your paper through. So that's where all those formatting things come from. And it is designed so that me and you as the student, can communicate back and forth through ETD in order to work on the formatting. So people sometimes ask, when should I submit to ETD? The answer to that is truly as soon as possible. as soon as you have a decent draft. However, ASAP is a little open to interpretation, because some people will say, okay, well, then that's like the day before the deadline. So that's not soon enough. The real answer to that question is you should be submitting your work to ETD for formatting checks 2 weeks prior to your defense. So by the time I mean, you don't even have to have a specific date. You just know the general time of year you're planning to defend. 2 weeks prior to that is when you should try to get something submitted to ETD for formatting checks. Formatting can be obnoxious to deal with, particularly at the end. So the sooner you integrate the rules and the sooner you get me to double check that, the sooner you can fix those things or like stop doing something that is wrong way earlier so that you're not up against the wire when you're trying to finish. So when people start to get started on this, they get intimidated because this is the platform that, you know, through which we send your paper out into the world, basically. So it feels very final, feels very intimidating when you go in to make your submission. Please, please, please hear me. If you hear nothing else, hear me now. Your submission on ETD is not final. It is absolutely not final. There are a bunch of different things that, you know, keep and make sure that your paper doesn't go anywhere close to publication, let alone to your committee for their perusal. That does not happen until way later into the process. So what you need to do is get on ETD and make your submission, and you have to hit submit. You cannot save it as a draft, because if you save it as a draft, I don't have access to it and I don't get an email letting me know that you want me to check it. So you'll go through, you'll fully submit. It's gonna feel weird, I know, but just be brave. You can do it. Hit submit, and then I get an email letting me know that you have submitted your paper for formatting checks. Then I'll go into your submission, I'll check your paper, and then through ETD, I send you back notes for further fixes. We repeat that cycle back and forth. So until your paper is basically, I'm ready to approve it. So do I create a new submission in ETD every time I submit a revision to my paper? No, 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 please don't do that. So when you are working in ETD, your submission is your baby, like, and you're not going to create extras. You're not going to have extras floating around because you'll forget which one is the most updated. Then I'll have like hundreds of extra submissions. It's no good. You can replace the documents. That's the term it uses. You replace your document as many times as you want. So when we go through the cycle of you submitting and me responding with notes, you'll get an email from ETD, from the ETD system, that includes a link. When you click on that link, it automatically takes you to the revisions page. And that is where you can submit or replace your revised document. So again, we'll go through that cycle as many times as needed to check your formatting and make sure things look good on my side. We will not approve the paper until after your defense. What you will want to make sure to do is keep an eye on the formatting, obviously, but you may have further edits requested in the content from your defense. And so we will not approve a paper, even if it looks perfect for formatting. We're not going to approve the paper until after your defense. So question, so ETD, how committee members will receive my dissertation rather than me sending them a draft informally? Great question. So ETD is how your committee members and department head will approve your paper at the very end. It is not how you should communicate with them about content and, fixes. So ETD as a discussion platform is for formatting. You should discuss anything content wise or having them check it. You should do that outside of ETD. Then at the end, when like I said, you've depended, I'm good on formatting, I will send you an email, and I will get, written confirmation from you that you are ready for me to send it, because I want to hold on to that paper until you give me the go ahead. Because when I approve the paper, it automatically sends an email to your department head and your committee members, letting them know that your paper is ready for their final approval. Again, we used to do that process in person and it was a pain. And so this way they just get a link to check your paper and then click a box that says, yes, this person's done. Okay, when you're submitting, one of the other things that people get hung up on is the repository agreement. So we have a repository agreement specifically for our institutional repository for the U of I, that basically is a boilerplate, that goes over what you're producing, where you produced it, why it's being published here, what, if any, restrictions you want to place on when it's released, etc. So that is a requirement for completion. You don't have to complete it to submit. So one of the things people get hung up on is like, well, I don't have a signed copy of my repository agreement. I don't care. I don't need it. I need it at the end, but if you just, it's like 3 weeks before your defense and you just want me to check it, it can be a blank piece of paper for all I care. But you can just submit the form blank. You do not have to have it completed when you submit it for formatting checks. So don't let that hold you up or keep you from, just going for it, because I want to see your paper sooner rather than later. Okay, and then the last thing, should I be making purchases and paying any money during this process? No. There are like 2 caveats to that, but for the most part, no, don't pay any money. There are a couple of things that it'll try to charge you for or ask you if you want to select. One of them is open access publishing. It doesn't get a lot more open access than ProQuest and public university repository. However, if open access publishing is something that you want to pursue, you should discuss that with your major professor. And you should see if maybe you can get some funding for that, because it's $95. You're not required to do it, nor do, so like if you're confused about it, just ignore it. The other thing that people will sometimes purchase is bound copies of their work. That is, you are totally welcome to do that. You won't get it until like, I don't know, 6 months later. They're very slow and they could be a little bit spendy. So my recommendation is, if you are looking to get a bound copy instead of buying it while you're doing the submission, go to the university print shop. The U of I copy and print shop, or whatever it goes by these days, is just excellent work on bound copies of theses or dissertations, and they are significantly faster on the turnaround. So if you are not on campus here in Moscow, you can also order through the website and they can ship basically anywhere. So, alrighty. And then I think that's the end of my spiel. We do have a few more resources listed. Oh, I should update this because I think a couple of these things maybe don't exist anymore, and I feel like I forget it every time. But I will ask Amanda. Amanda, do you happen to know if or maybe Michael does, if the statistical consulting is still a thing? I don't think it is. So ignore that, but
I don't think it is anymore.
okay, you can definitely find some other options on campus, but they're no longer in service. One of the things, gosh, I'm bad at this, one of the things that I would highly recommend is if you are struggling with Word or even LaTeX, but it's typically Word that people run into the issues and you're just stuck and you can't get a lot of fixing done. I'll be totally honest, it's just me working on checking the formatting. So I don't have a significant amount of time to help hands-on with fixing formatting things. So in those situations, if you're real stuck, I recommend going to the Writing Center. We have a graduate writing, I think specific to graduate writing, that is there for your assistants basically, and they can be extremely helpful in navigating some of those little quirks. So, oh, and we got some resources chatting in the chat. Good, great job, y'all. So yes, highly recommend using them if you start to run into issues. Like I said, and this is just a recommendation for everybody, sooner rather than later is a good idea for submitting for formatting checks because, like I said, it's just me. So the later into the semester we get, the more people I'm working with and the longer it takes for me to get back to you. So I take the papers kind of as a as they come situation with a couple of, you know, caveats for triage situations, but like what I do is after I respond to your paper, you go, you know, out into the ether. And then when you resubmit, I take them as they come. So all of that rambling to say, try to submit sooner rather than later because it'll give me way more time to work with you. But also, if you take the time to really get into the formatting in the handbook and just use it as a template, you're gonna be totally fine. I on average send a paper back 2 to 3 times, just depending. The first is really a check overall for like major stuff, and then the second one is usually just polishing. But you know, more times we have to go back and forth. The longer it takes, the later in the semester, the closer it gets to maybe not finishing. So, you know, just as a bit of advice. And then, yeah, so if you guys have any more questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I am done. Wow, I talked for an hour. I'm so sorry, y'all. That's a lot. Here are a couple of bits of information. I don't recommend trying to call me. My phone doesn't work, and I work from home typically. So email is the best way to get a hold of me. If you want me to check your paper, cool, and go ahead and give me a heads up if you want to, but don't send it to me through email. You want to make sure that you send it to me through ETD, because that way we don't lose any info. So, okay. Well, if there's no questions, then you guys are are free. I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, please shoot me an email. I'm happy to help, and just really appreciate you guys. So. Oh, we did have one quick question, minimum and maximum words for the dissertation. Not at all. I'm not checking that. That's a combo for you and your major professor, but I don't have any requirements. We don't. So, alrighty.
Cool. Thanks, Molly.
Well, thanks, y'all.
See ya.
Have an awesome Monday.